Clara Bow just boarded the train that would change her life forever. But wait, let's recap part 1 real quick. Before Taylor Swift or Stevie Nicks, there's Clara Bow. Born in Brooklyn, New York during a time of death, poverty, and pandemics, Clara faced a beyond traumatic childhood. Her father, Robert Bow, frequently left Clara and her mom, Sarah, for months at a time, only to return with verbally abusing Clara and physically abusing Sarah. Despite these challenges, Clara won a once-in-a-lifetime contest to work in film. Sarah Bow's mental health made it difficult for her to accept her daughter's pursuit to work in the film industry. So much so that she attempted to kill her daughter multiple times, as Clara's dreams to work in film started to become true. Thankfully, she was unsuccessful at every attempt to kill her daughter, and then shortly after, Clara's mom would pass away. Things started to take a turn for Clara, and she would meet her first boyfriend, Arthur Jacobson, while working on a film together. Her talents caught the attention of a Hollywood director that invited her to work in California. Then, Robert Bow took his daughter to Grand Central Station. Here, Clara would meet her agent, Maxine, who would accompany her for her trip to Hollywood. Clara's fantasy to leave behind her traumatic childhood and pursue her dream career in film was coming true as she boarded the train. If you haven't watched part 1, don't be mad at me. I barely scratched the surface on what happened. You can watch part 1 by going to the link at the top of the description. Robert Bow couldn't afford to take the train with Clara. Because of this, Clara knew she wouldn't see her father for at least 3 months. Maxine noted how Robert and Clara's goodbye was peculiarly lacking in sentiment. He said nothing, just nothing at all. Not a sign of tenderness passed between them. Clara felt this lack and craved her father to say anything, but he chose not to. Once on the train, all that Clara could think about was that she was going to Hollywood. She got to travel first class on the world-renowned 20th Century Limited train. She ended up bringing very few items with her. She wore the same outfit the entire trip. She brought a portable phonograph or record player and one vinyl record. She would play this record on full volume over and over and over again until Maxine had enough and told her to stop. This left Clara restless, so she started to wander the train, and not caring about the luxuries that the train had to offer, she started to befriend everyone from the staff to the millionaire passengers. Even the changing landscapes, from the Northeast to the Great Plains to the sun-bleached Mojave Desert, nothing could take her attention away from her dreams. Finally, after passing miles and miles of vineyards, they arrived at the train station in downtown Los Angeles. Clara arrived in Los Angeles during Hollywood's boom in the mid-1920s, when the city's population grew to over 1 million people. However, as Hollywood was being established, it dealt with multiple scandals from assaults, high-profile deaths, and overdoses, prompting backlash from civic and church groups. This led to the creation of a censorship board that ruled over Hollywood. Any film that broke the rules, like using strong language or explicit content, would be banned from theaters, guaranteeing the film to flop. They enforced this by including strict moral clauses in every actor's contract, controlling their behavior both on and off the screen. What a great idea, right? Like, controlling people's behavior has always worked out so well. Like, historically, that's never been a problem. Clara didn't know all the rules of Hollywood yet, but all that mattered to her is that she arrived and would earn about $50 a week, or $900 today. When they arrived at the train station, Maxine noticed Clara's disheveled appearance and snuck her off the train, away from the reporters that were awaiting Clara. Schulberg, Clara's boss and producer, was frantic that they had just missed the PR opportunity. But once Clara and Maxine arrived to Schulberg's office, he couldn't believe Clara's appearance. Schulberg was furious, confused, and regretted having Clara come out to Hollywood. But Maxine calmed him down and convinced him to give Clara a screen test. They walked over to a studio, and Schulberg conducted the whole thing himself. Schulberg ordered her to laugh, and she did, with joy filling the room. He ordered her to cry, and tears immediately started streaming down her face. Despite all the chaos, Clara impressed everyone with her ability to laugh and cry on demand. Maxine would describe it as the most brutal experience a girl would have had. An ordinary person would have been petrified with fear. She would have known that her future hung in the balance, and an unjust balance at that. Schulberg's fear left, and he was beyond impressed with Clara's performance. He gave Clara the second lead role in his latest film, Maytime. A week later, the crew was begging him to fire the lead role and give it to Clara. While he refused, Clara's talents started to quickly grab everyone's attention in Hollywood. Maxine rented her and Clara an apartment on the corner of Hollywood Boulevard and Hudson Avenue. She would drop Clara off and pick her up from work every day. Maxine quickly became a friend, protector, and mother-like figure to Clara. No one had ever shown Clara so much attention and care before. This led Clara to idolize Maxine and rely on her for not only her career, but her personal life as well. At first, life in California was everything that Clara dreamed of. She had people she could rely on and cared for her. She had money. Her dream career was exploding, but there was one problem. Her love, Arthur Jacobson, was still in New York. Back in New York, Arthur wasn't doing well. He said, "These were the longest weeks of my life. I was so in love, I couldn't see." 2 months later, he withdrew all of his savings and went out to California. Clara was so delighted to see him. Yet Maxine, who protected Clara like a mother cub, wasn't so sure of him. Maxine tried to keep everything away from Clara. But as usual, Arthur found a way to spend time with Clara by giving her driving lessons at nearby Magnetic Hill to practice. Clara actually did learn how to drive, but she would become known for her reckless driving throughout Hollywood. After Arthur's arrival, Schulberg cast Clara in his film Black Oxen, and this provided Clara many more successful roles. With her growing income, Clara and Maxine decided to move into a bungalow off Sunset Boulevard, but Maxine refused to let Arthur move in with them. Clara then got a role in a film called Painted People. The lead actress, Colleen Moore, was known for bringing the 1920s flapper movement mainstream. Colleen inspired others within the movement, like Clara, to continue pushing the boundaries of societal norms. This would be foundational to Clara's career. After her work on Painted People, Clara continued to find good work, but Maxine painted a picture of scarcity to her. For months, Clara begged Maxine to let her father come to California, but Maxine warned that Robert's presence would anger her bosses. She eroded Clara's confidence by telling her that she wasn't doing good work and that she might be sent back to New York soon. Clara's trusting disposition and insulation with her work gave her no reason to doubt Maxine's dreadfully fragile outlook on Clara's career and life. Clara played lead roles in multiple films like Poison to Paradise and Daughters of Pleasure. Did no one think through the title of that film? Anyways. Even with her continued success, Clara couldn't see how Maxine was manipulating her. She kept trying to make me think I wasn't making good and that they was going to send me back to New York soon. I was worried all the time and gave her more and more authority and power because I thought she might keep him from doing that. Clara's trust crumbled when she accidentally discovered that Maxine and Schulberg were hooking up and colluding against her. Feeling betrayed, Clara demanded that Schulberg fire Maxine and bring her father to California. Arthur noted, "Clara was the sweetest kid, but you didn't cross her and you didn't do her wrong." Robert Bow arrived to California shortly after. The film Black Oxen premiered in December of 1923, and it was a smash hit, as they would say. She ran away with it, Arthur declared. This led Clara to making it on the Baby Stars list, recognizing her as one of the most promising talents of the year. A party for those on the list, alongside prominent actors, directors, and producers, was to be held at the Ambassador Hotel. However, due to the LAPD banning dancing after midnight, they moved the event to San Francisco, and their tax dollars went to protect people from dancing. Clara would travel alone to San Francisco and befriended fellow actress Ruth Hyatt. Ruth recalled how lonely and deprived of parental love Clara was. "Clara clung to my mother. She never left her side, and my publicity man wasn't happy about it." As the other stars mingled, Clara sat alone in awe of them. Clara wasn't the carefree actress that she portrayed on screen, and others realized this too. Ruth would say she was peppy and vivacious in front of people, but when you talked to her one-on-one, she was serious and sad. A fellow actress recalled she was away from the crowd, a loner. Have these people not heard of us introverts before? Back in Hollywood, things were chaotic. Clara's popularity started to rise, and multiple studios wanted her to work for them. As a standard practice in the industry at the time, Schulberg would loan Clara out to other studios for $500 a week, of which he would pay Clara $200, which would be about $3,600 today. While she started to make good money, she was overworked, barely able to keep up with the multiple jobs at once. While unhappily working at multiple studios, she moved into a 3-bedroom house at 7576 Hollywood Boulevard. She shared a room with Arthur, Robert had his own room, and her very first dog got an entire room to itself. Sorry, I couldn't find the name or the sex of the dog. She had multiple dogs throughout her life, like Duke, but the details of this one remain a mystery. Robert had no problem with Clara and Arthur living together, yet the thought of Clara being around another man sent him into a deep rage. One night while Arthur and Robert were talking, Arthur mentioned how Clara was visiting a director who lived across town. Robert became livid, grabbed his gun, and ran to his car while vowing to kill the director if Clara was still there. Arthur envisioned a scandal unfolding similar to a mysterious murder that had recently plagued Hollywood. Arthur hopped in Clara's car, took a shortcut to the director's house, and grabbed Clara away moments before Robert got there. Clara and Arthur's relationship continued to grow, and they started to talk about marriage. They planned to have a secret ceremony in Santa Ana in order to be away from Robert in fear of his response. One day, they started to head that way, but while on the drive, they started fighting and would return home. A year later, they were still not married, and their relationship died out into a close friendship. Arthur would eventually move out into an apartment of his own, but he would remain close friends with Clara, and they would work together on numerous films. Clara's career continued to flourish. She would meet the director, Ernest Lubitsch, at Warner Brothers. He was known for his subtle approach to bypassing sexual censorship by having the audience use their imagination through suggestion. During her screen test with him, Clara misinterpreted his nervous lip smacking as a taunt and mimicked him. He became flustered and turned bright red, calling her a damn fresh kid. Earning his rebuke, but impressing him with her talent, she was cast in his latest film, Kiss Me Again. She would play the role of a Parisian secretary who bewitches her married boss. How fucking original, dude. What is it, like the 1920s or something? Oh, wait, yeah, actually. Clara would call the director a godsend, and the film's success earned her critical acclaim. However, she grew frustrated with her producer, Schulberg, who kept her in low-budget films in order to exploit her popularity. He would cast her in 20 films in 2 years. Clara was burnt out and knew that she deserved better. In the summer of 1925, everything changed for Clara. She starred in Plastic Age, a film about school, sports, and sex. Schulberg believed that it could define her career. With a supportive director, Clara thrived. It was here that she met Billy Kaplan, who, in her words, became her steady fella. During breaks, they would sit in Clara's red roadster and bond over their shared experience of stammering in school. But Billy quickly lost his place as her steady fella. He was unaware that he would become a go-between for who would become Clara's first really big love experience. While working on Plastic Age, she met a new, timid, unexperienced actor named Gilbert Roland. He would sheepishly approach Billy while handing him a folded note and asking Billy to give it to Clara. I don't know what was in that note because I was too conscientious to read it, especially when I could feel his strong Latin eyes drilling into my back as I caught up with Clara and delivered it. Okay, anyways. She mumbled, "Oh, thanks, buddy. Sweet of ya," and took a quick glance over her shoulder at the young bullfighter turned actor. Robert Bow's bigotry would be brought out as he openly shared his hatred of Gilbert. He forbid Clara to marry a Catholic and even more so as Gilbert himself was Mexican and recently moved to California. And we can add that to the list of Robert's outstanding qualities: sexist, racist, misogynistic. Plastic Age was her 15th film of the year in 1925. Schulberg's bets had paid off. It was Preferred Pictures' biggest success yet, and it took Clara from familiar to famous. Schulberg would start to work with Paramount Pictures. Clara would travel to New York for her first film with Paramount on November 19th, 1925. The film blew away Paramount's expectations of success, and they would rank Clara 38th in the list of stars. 1 year later, she was first on the list, thanks to her work on a film called Man Trap. It brought her fame and fortune like never before, and Victor Fleming into her life. Victor was a director who would be known for working on films like The Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind. You could say that he was a bit of a character. Helen Rosen would say he was so attractive, 6 feet tall with steel gray eyes, salt and pepper hair, a deep voice, and a conservative but beautiful style. I was his stepdaughter, and I was in love with him. Not sure we needed to know the fact that you were in love with your stepdad there, Helen, but okay. While working on Man Trap, Billy Kaplan would say that he knew that there was something going on between the two of them. You could see that there was a relationship there. But Victor was twice the age of Clara at 43 years old. Another Leonardo DiCaprio. At just 21 years old, Clara found herself in love with him. After filming Man Trap, Clara rented a log cabin at 261 West Canyon Drive, reuniting with Gilbert while continuing her affair with Victor. There, she met her first close female friend, Tui Lorraine, who recently moved from New Zealand. Clara and Tui met at a Hollywood party, and Clara soon invited Tui over for drinks. Tui recalled, "I couldn't believe she would ever be so blue. I'd never met such a bubbling, friendly, natural person anywhere, especially in Hollywood." Their visit was interrupted when Gilbert stormed into the cabin, demanding, "Where is he? I know he's here. I'll fix him. I'll fight a duel with him." Clara found Gilbert charming, while Tui found his actions absurd. No one else was at the cabin, and Clara considered herself informally engaged to Gilbert. Clara loved having the attention of other admirers. Even with the guidance from Victor and the passion from Gilbert, Clara still desired more. Less than a month later, she found her third partner, Robert Savage. Okay, Polly Queen, no judgment here. Just to be clear, any mention of Robert during this section is about Robert Savage, not her father, Robert Bow. Clara met Robert through a mutual friend who called her and said he had a friend from Yale who was just crazy to meet me, even though he only went to Yale for a year. Clara invited him, along with his friend Gus Patterson, over to a party at her cabin. Gus recalled how Clara and Robert spent the whole night hanging out on her porch. She learned that he dabbled in poetry, of course, and while periodically kissing him, called him her poet lover. Clara would reassure Robert, who was wondering about her engagement, by saying, "Never mind my fiancé, he's just a conceited Spaniard." Okay. Way to manipulate all your relationships to keep them happy there. Okay. Afterwards, Gus recalled how she bit his lips until they bled, but Clara denied it, saying, "I didn't bite his lip. He must have gone home and cut it." This put an abrupt end to the romance. He was hurt by Clara's quick rejection, and a friend warned Clara that he had a plan to end it all. "Don't worry, he won't. He thinks too much of himself," Clara responded. After a few days of pleading with her, Clara allowed Robert to pick her up. He promised it'd be the last time he'd bother me. When he picked her up, he told Clara that he was taking her to get a marriage license. He said, "I'm gonna marry ya. In a few hours, you'll be Mrs. Robert Savage, or I'm gonna waste my life away in Alaska." "Don't be silly," I told him. "I don't love ya. I don't even like ya." Luckily, they got stuck in traffic, and the licensed marriage department closed 5 minutes before they arrived. Clara was filled with rage and snapped at him, saying, "Take me home or I'll walk back." Robert did, and then went to tell the story to reporters. Gilbert, who considered himself her fiancé, was enraged, and so was Clara. "I am engaged to Gilbert Rowland. I don't love Bob Savage. This whole thing is ridiculous," she told reporters. Robert wrote one last poem about his love for Clara. A haunting voice comes in the twilight, whispering soft and low, telling of a beautiful creature, telling of Clara. It keeps going for a while, but I'll spare you from having to listen to the rest of it. Robert then hinted to his friends about his plan to end it all. That night, he attempted his plan as a way to get Clara's attention. He was taken to a hospital and then transferred to a psychiatric ward. He then demanded to speak with reporters, and the story would be on the front page the next day. He later said, "I never wanted to in the first place. I was just pulling some theatrical stuff to make an effect on her. Sure, I still love her, and I'll still get her. Just watch my smoke." Alright, Robert, you can still be romantically theatrical and not manipulate someone into loving you. Anyways, let's move on. Clara then held a press conference and raged at Robert for turning their one date into 2 weeks of headlines. "Mr. Savage is just an episode in my young life." She then goes into graphic detail of his plan, which I can't share on this platform. At least she didn't give in to his manipulation, I guess. Society was changing quickly. Prior to 1926, a scandal like this could have ruined an actress's career, but Clara emerged without a scratch. However, her relationship with Gilbert wasn't so lucky, ending with a broken engagement, followed by a front-page reconciliation a week later. Clara promised Gilbert that she would elope to Spain with him once she finished working on her current film, Kid Boots. She loved him and wanted to marry him, even if her father disapproved. But to Gilbert, the message was clear. Her first true love was her career. Clara entered her Reputation era. While working on Kid Boots, Man Trap premiered, and the film The Plastic Age was still premiering across the country on its way to New York. She had 2 hits in theaters at the same time, taking her from famous to an established star overnight. When Kid Boots wrapped up, Paramount gave her a month off and reworked her contract, but she waited to sign anything, knowing that she had power and leverage. She hired attorney Neil McCarthy to negotiate with Paramount. McCarthy demanded a limit on the number of films she could work on per year, a non-loan out to other studios clause, and the removal of the moral clause, along with pay increases. She got everything. It was the first time Paramount ever gave out a contract without a moral clause. Clara felt powerful. She broke some of the control that the studio had over her, taking that back for herself. Yet, Paramount saw her way of life as a potential problem. They found a small loophole to make her $25,000 cash bonus contingent upon her behavior. But this didn't matter much to Clara, as she could keep working and make money no matter what. She traveled to San Antonio, Texas to work on a film called Wings, a World War I film that had the largest production budget ever at $2 million, or about $35 million today. At the very same time, Victor Fleming just happened to be directing a film in San Antonio. A day after arriving, Clara and Victor announced their engagement. She became dependent on his support and guidance, and was certain of him when he helped her with her contract negotiations. Age gaps can be okay, but she's a kid. He's not. The power dynamics here. The words that she's using. Come on. Clara told reporters that Vicky and her would get married the following February. The weather was so hot that I was whipped. I mean, yeah, no shit, it's San Antonio, Texas, like. She ended up only spending 3 days in San Antonio, as most of her scenes would be shot in studios back in LA. Wings was her biggest film yet, setting her up to become the it girl. Eleanor Glenn was the queen of Hollywood. Known as Madame Glenn, she ruled over its social scene. Quote, she took over Hollywood. She went everywhere and passed her fearsome verdicts on everything. This is glamorous, she would say. This is hideous, she would say. People moved aside for her as if she was a sorceress on fire. In 1926, Schulberg would read Eleanor Glenn's latest book, titled It. It was a romantic novel that created the concept of it, which Eleanor describes as a magnetic quality that attracts others and exudes charm and sex appeal without being overtly sexual. The book is more about romantic and social intrigue rather than explicit content. Sorry, smut lovers. Inspired by the book, Schulberg approached the queen and she agreed to proclaim Clara and it synonyms. But it wasn't for free. Paramount had to pay the queen $50,000, or about $900,000 today. That's a lot of money just to use a pronoun. But wait, you may be thinking, John, there's a plot hole to this real-life story. I thought Clara and Gilbert were engaged when she got engaged to Victor. Yes. Gilbert had sent Clara a telegram when she was in San Antonio, sarcastically congratulating her. Clara would wire back, assuring him that it wasn't true. But of course it was. When I got back, I had a tough time convincing Gilbert I loved him more than anybody. He finally said it was alright if I didn't see no other men. Schulberg then arranged for Clara to meet the queen who had crowned her it. Clara would meet Eleanor Glenn while dropping by Schulberg's office. So this is Clara Bow. She placed her hand on Clara's head like it was a crystal ball and said, "You are my medium, child. You are to portray the leading role in my story." Schulberg then explained to Clara how she would be known as the It Girl. Eleanor continued, "It is an inner magic, an animal magnetism." Eleanor's other choice descriptors included another actor and a stallion. I was awful confused about the horse, but if she thought he had it, then I figured he must have been quite an animal. Okay, don't need to know any more about the queen's thoughts on stallions. Let's move on, please. Schulberg then commissioned the creation of the movie It, which was heavily inspired by Clara's life if she had remained in Brooklyn. Eleanor would show up to the set. She has it. That girl will be one of the greatest someday. But off-screen, she would tell Clara to clean up her act, to stop chewing gum, and cut out the profanity. Clara didn't have the patience for this, and as she persisted, Eleanor went from Madame to that shithead. When Eleanor overheard Clara call her this, she abruptly stopped her efforts to rein in Clara. Schulberg's plan worked. Opening week, the film earned double any other film across the country. Variety would say, "This Bow girl certainly has that certain it for which the picture is named." F. Scott Fitzgerald would say, "Clara Bow is the quintessence of what the term flapper signifies." The film didn't just change Clara Bow's career, it changed her life. She wasn't just famous, she was the most famous person in America. After working on the film, she decided to buy a house. Instead of following the Hollywood tradition of buying a custom-built mansion, she bought a cozy 7-bedroom Spanish bungalow in Beverly Hills, because that's really small. Schulberg eventually convinced her to hire a cook, maid, and chauffeur. Despite Clara's down-to-earth attitude, she couldn't ignore her fame. She knew it came from working hard on 37 films in 5 years, but it still felt too good to be true. Her fantasies of escaping her abusive childhood by becoming a star had come true beyond her wildest dreams. She was happier than ever, but was terrified of what would happen if her fans found out that the carefree flapper was actually a child of poverty and despair. What would happen when they learned that a self-confident it girl actually had no self-esteem at all? Once Eleanor Glenn called her the it girl, it changed Clara completely. She had always put on this act because she was so shy and insecure. Now Clara believed she was the it girl. She tried to be vivacious. She tried to be fascinating. She tried to be clever. And she worked her body and mind and soul to death. Fellow actor Buddy Rogers. She would live up to her title when she met Gary Cooper on the set of her next film, Children of Divorce. But while she was engaged to Victor publicly and Gilbert privately, nothing happened until months later when her affair with Gary was the biggest gossip in LA. Gary had many girlfriends. Looking as he did, you see why, Cooper's widow would admit. His reputation as an actor would be tarnished when reports of him being queer came out in a much more homophobic time. Hollywood was filled with the gossip of his rumored relationships. While Gary himself never publicly came out, there are telegrams of him writing to one of his boyfriends that he lived with. He worked as a stuntman until he got a small part in a film. He had no acting experience, but he was a natural. He had that peculiar personality, that intangible quality that just communicates on camera. Either you have it or you don't. Gary had it, and so did Clara, Colleen Moore would say. While working on Children of Divorce, Gary would confide in another actress saying, "I think I'm in love. You want to know who? It's Clara. I'm in love with Clara Bow." She felt the same. While we was doing rehearsals, we fell in love. Victor found out about Clara's new love when he returned from San Antonio. Clara told the press that her broken relationship was temporary, hoping that Victor would forgive and forget her affair with Gary. But her other fiancé wasn't as forgiving. That was the loss of Gilbert Roland. He told me he'd given me 3 chances and he was finished. I will always love Carlita. If she were only 26, God, how I would love her. But she is just a baby. She doesn't understand men, and she doesn't understand love, Gilbert would tell Clara's father. She and Gary had a pretty hot affair, and Clara talked about it a lot. She also used pretty strong language to describe it, and in those days, it was absolutely taboo to utter anything like that in public, recalled her friend Lena Basquet. "Oh, she'd say that sort of thing to anybody," said Tui Lorraine. Schulberg would then create a formula for Clara's films, keeping her the only big star and the budget low. This was so that no one or nothing else could steal the spotlight from Clara. Not the production value, not the story, or another actor. And he would make Clara work on as many films as he was contractually allowed to. Even though her contract reined in the amount of films she could work on in a year, she still felt overworked. Along with this, she felt equally overwhelmed in her private life. While talking about marriage with Gary, she still saw Victor on the side. Gary was furious, and Victor was passive about it, but Clara was torn between the two. Gary was big and strong, but Vicky was older and understood me. I needed someone to soothe me. Vicky was like that. I mothered Gary, but Vicky mothered me. While the emotional pressure of picking between Gary or Victor took a toll on her, working on a film called Rough House Rosie during the day and doing retakes of Children of Divorce at night started to wear her out physically. Clara was beyond exhausted and couldn't handle it anymore. This led to production stopping for 2 weeks. The director blamed it on her indecisiveness to choose between her 2 partners. The press would diagnose her with having a nervous breakdown, which Clara called ridiculous. There was no nervous breakdown, agreed Tui. They worked Clara so hard that she just dropped from exhaustion. This led to Schulberg canceling her next film and giving her a 3-month vacation. In the spring of 1927, Clara and Gary's relationship came to a standstill. Gary's mom, Alice Cooper, couldn't stand the idea of having a daughter-in-law like Clara. Gary wouldn't share much about his private life to his parents, so Alice sent her husband to go spy on Gary to figure out what was going on with him. His mother didn't like me, and his mother ran his life, Clara would say. Clara retaliated by showing off her relationship with Victor, as he was set to be the director on her next film, Hula. After what she would call a silly little fight with Gary over Victor, their relationship of 6 months came to an end. Tui believed that if Gary had tried a bit harder, I think Clara would have married him. Really, she would have married him. It might have worked. Tui then went and confronted him on the Paramount lot. "Gary, why don't you marry Clara? You're made for each other." Gary then turned bright red. Too late, mumbling about a fella she's flipped for. Despite Clara claiming that they never saw each other again, they secretly hooked up for another 2 years. Paramount paired Clara and Victor together to capitalize on their current romance and their past success together. And just like that, the capitalistic machine within Hollywood started to exploit love lives. Their work together on Hula started on June 9th, 1927. The film followed the new formula: low budget, bland co-actor, Clara supposedly playing herself, with Victor directing. Hula was a hit. The film is problematic by today's standards, filled with cultural appropriation and pushing the sexualization of women within Hollywood. While it has its issues with racism and sexism, it was a societal shift for a film, with breaking conventional gender roles, which allowed Clara's character, without guilt or punishment, to get what she desired.
Now let me be clear.
After Hula, Clara realized that while she admired him tremendously, and their relationship was a very serious thing, she wasn't ready to settle down with someone who was twice her age. Vicky wanted to marry her, but I don't think that he was social enough, or showy. That's a better word for it, Tui would say. And this obviously led to an end of their relationship. Good for Clara. I mean, she's the more mature one here. The dude's basically grooming her. He's twice her age. She's barely in her 20s. Obviously, an age gap doesn't have to be a bad thing, but there's clearly a power dynamic thing here. And yeah, go Clara. Fuck him. The breakup left Clara feeling all alone again. I really don't care about men, Clara would say. That sounds a little There are rumors about her being bi, but they seem to be just rumors at that. She did have a number of queer friends though, and accepted them for who they were, and we'll get more into those details as the story continues to unfold. I really don't care about men. I know 4 I like. Each one's got one thing that appeals to me, but not one of them's got the combination. She saw a fantasy that didn't exist. A combination of Arthur's dedication, Victor's counsel, Gary's humble talent, and Gilbert's macho passion. Marriage ain't woman's only job no more. A girl who's worked hard and earned her place ain't gonna be satisfied as a wife. I know this. I wouldn't give up my work for a marriage, she told the columnist Dorothy Manners. She was her own man. She didn't care what people thought of her, and she was resented for it, Dorothy would comment. Clara Bow, no matter how great her popularity, was a lowlife and a disgrace to the community. Schulberg's 12-year-old son would realize. She was never invited to any Hollywood social events. Why? She committed the unforgivable sin of remaining herself in the land that was always acting. Her presence was an insulting reminder of their uneasy position in high society, wrote Louise Brooks. She was married to the director Edward Sutherland, and she wanted to invite her over to a dinner party. Edward forbid it, saying, "We don't know what she would do. She's from Brooklyn, you know? These people really need to stop watching Fox News talk about New York." Clara had not renounced her humble beginnings like the rest of Hollywood, guaranteeing her to always be an outcast and have very little social life. Clara wasn't well liked amongst other women in the film colony. Her social presence was taboo, and it was rather silly because God knows other actresses had plenty to hide. It was just that they hid it. And Clara didn't. Clara didn't follow the unwritten code of sexual conduct within Hollywood. You could do whatever you want with whoever you want, as long as it was kept private. Clara just called a spade a spade. She didn't care what anyone thought. She just went ahead and did what she wanted to do. One night, Clara had dinner with the Schulbergs and Judge Lindsay, who is known for his open-minded views like premarital sex.
Wow.
Clara arrived late and tipsy. "Hiya, Judge. Ben tells me you believe people ought to have their fun without having to get married. You naughty boy." She then kissed him on the lips. His wife was shocked at what just happened. Clara then demanded that they dance. Everyone watched with panic as she began to undo his jacket buttons. As she reached down to his pants, he fled from Clara, running to his wife's arms. Clara didn't understand. Well, gee whiz, if he believes in all that modern stuff like you say he does, how come he's such an old stick in the mud? Well, for one thing, consent, boundaries, and you can accept certain ideas without wanting to act out those ideas yourself. But hey, I guess at least, I'm not sure. Shortly after, one evening, Clara would have the journalist Adele Rogers St. John's over for an interview along with Tui. Clara arrived exhausted from a long day of work, and Adele wasn't sure that the interview was still a good idea. But then Clara came to life, and the interview lasted until the next morning. Adele was astonished at Clara's telling of her story, not missing a single detail. Brooklyn, hunger, hopelessness, her absent parents, the butcher knife, her mother's death which she still blamed herself for, the contest, her rise to fame, her relationships with Arthur, Gilbert, Gary, and Victor. Yet, despite all of her success, she still found herself lonely. Once started, she could not stop. It was though a dam had broken open, and the words poured out without volition, as though she had not for years talked to anyone who might sympathize and understand. Adele called the interview with Clara the peak of my experiences. There is hammered into her soul a fear of life, and that is why she desires to live fast and furiously. That night, Adele had befriended the real Clara. There is no pattern, no purpose to her life. She swings from one emotion to another, but she gains nothing, stores up nothing against the future. She lives entirely in the present, not even for today, just for the moment. And you go on loving her, feeling sorry for her, and praying that she won't get into any real trouble. Adele was concerned that reality would catch up with Clara in a devastating way. Unfortunately, those worries would soon come to life. My Life Story by Clara Bow, as told by Adele Rogers St. John's, appeared in Photoplay, only editing her vocabulary while keeping every detail of her story. The hope that the article would improve Clara's social life dwindled as nothing had changed for her. No one could understand why she wanted to keep dredging up old memories, leaving her an outcast from her peers. Adele appointed herself as Clara's protector and had her brother take over her finances from Robert Bow, who had greatly mismanaged her money, and Adele would often invite Clara over to her ranch. Sadly, their relationship would quickly be strained. One night when Clara was over, Adele's husband was scrambling eggs in the kitchen. Like, just literally scrambling eggs. Clara joined him in the kitchen and talked while he was cooking. Adele was furious when she found out, suspecting that something had happened. Clara was guilty until proven innocent. And while they did remain loyal friends to each other, the invites to the ranch slowly faded away. The most popular girl in America found herself alone again. Most of my friends are ones I knew before I paid income tax, and their names mean nothing to nobody. When the film Children of Divorce finished shooting, actress Esther Ralston threw a party. Clara's dressing room was right next to mine, and she must have known I was giving a big party. All the Hollywood people were coming, everyone except Clara. Standing in the doorway, she asked, "Having a party, ain't ya, Esther?" Caught off guard, Esther replied, "Yes, Clara. Oh, would you like to come?" No, I know you don't want me," Clara assured her. Having nowhere to go, Clara spent most of her sleepless nights playing poker or darts with her maid, cook, and chauffeur. Schulberg was promoted at Paramount, and he would work on his last film directly with Clara, called Red Hair. They followed the typical formula for Clara's films, and it turned out to be her biggest hit since It. The film exceeded even the fondest expectations and ended the week with a near box office record. Long waiting lines were almost constant to see Red Hair. But Clara found herself burnt out again. Overworked and ashamed of how she would sometimes be portrayed in her films, she desired a change to work in dramas. Aware of how important her next film could be, she talked to Schulberg, begging him for a role in a serious film. To her surprise, he agreed, saying how a new film, Ladies of the Mob, needed a lead role. Schulberg would go on to remind her that any refusal to work would be a violation of her contract, unless she was physically ill. Clara started to suffer from sporadic abdominal pains, which would be diagnosed as appendicitis, and it was recommended that she have them removed. But things quickly continued to develop. Along with the abdominal pains, she had irregular menstrual cycles, which led Dr. Clarence Tolan to not only recommend the removal of her appendix, but also her ovaries. Clara found this idea to be inconceivable, that the top actress within Hollywood wouldn't be able to have her own children. She had recently decided to leave Hollywood, and when the right man came along, to marry and raise a family. The fact that her new dream was falling apart terrified her. Clara then consulted a handful of doctors, and they felt that the removal of her appendix would be enough. She begged her doctor to leave her ovaries alone, but he made no promises, doubting that it would be enough. Clara, realizing that any news about her would make the headlines, begged to keep the surgery a private matter away from the press. Even though only her doctor and Schulberg knew, the word still got out, and the New York Times would cover her operation. Dr. Tolan removed her appendix at St. Vincent's Hospital on February 13, 1928. While he didn't remove her ovaries, he warned her that her symptoms would most likely reappear. While recovering in the hospital, she begged Tui and her father to visit her every day. Robert got bored and left, saying that he had urgent business matters he needed to attend to, which was pretty much just bullshit because he lived off his daughter's money. But Tui was there every day, comforting Clara. What are you guys doing? Kiki was trying to eat food. Right. One of the hospital staff members would flirt with Tui every time he visited the room, but she consistently turned him down. Clara would pick up on this when they were leaving the hospital together. "You ain't interested in Earl, are ya, Tui?" She replied that he was all Clara's. "Good, 'cause I think I flipped for him." Tui snapped. "Just your type. Short on brains and long on other organs." Clara would giggle at Tui's response. That night, Clara would put on a record at full blast to drown out her call to St. Vincent's Hospital. Her dad didn't hear the conversation, but Tui did. "Okay, sweetie, but come as soon as you're off duty. I'll be waiting." Earl Peterson was Clara's first serious romance since Victor. While Robert would call him that son of a bitch, Clara found him to be smart, stable, and a southern gentleman from Texas, making him an almost perfect fit. I mean, Texas and California were a bit more similar than they were different back then, so we'll see how this works out. But there is one big problem. He told me that he had just been married, but that he and his wife was always squabbling and fighting and didn't understand each other. I never had no date with a married man in my life. While Earl had left his wife in Dallas, Texas, Clara knew she was tempting fate. Clara then received a letter from the U.S. Secret Service that read, "An inmate from the Illinois State Hospital for the Insane who is raving about murdering you has escaped. He says that you have the soul of a flying horse and that you are going to give birth to Jesus Christ, and on top of that, he is going to marry you." Clara was told that the Secret Service would send agent Mr. Rand to protect her. Clara was terrified and told Schulberg. He contacted the federal government and was told that there was no agent Mr. Rand. Security was then hired to protect Clara from whoever actually wrote her this letter. Thankfully, nothing beyond this had happened, and the matter was never made public until she passed away. Tui never went to see her best friend's movies, but she made an exception for Clara's first drama, Ladies of the Mob. I could see it, alright, anyone could. It was quite obvious that Clara had the talent to be a serious actress. But the public thought different. "We don't want to see you suffer." would read the typical letter from a fan. While her work in drama was some of her best, the audience didn't want it. She wanted terribly to go to other dramatic parts, but Schulberg wouldn't have it because the money kept rolling in from the silly tripe she was doing. Tui would add, Clara wasn't just the biggest star, she was Paramount's most lucrative asset, bringing in millions upon millions a year. And that was something that they did not want to risk. Clara felt trapped. Her enthusiasm for her only fulfilling part of life started to dwindle. She refused to do interviews discussing it. She would then go publicly on to say how she dreamed of leaving Hollywood after her contract with Paramount expired, then get married and raise a family. I want to think about it before doing it, and when I do marry, I want to make a success of it, while claiming that she had no one in mind yet. But she did. Earl Peterson told Clara that his wife was filing for divorce. Clara then moved from her log cabin to a 3-bedroom beach cottage in Malibu for only $30 a month, which would have been about $500 today. Besides Earl, only 2 other men had keys to her cottage, Arthur Jacobson and Jack Oakey, who had recently become a good friend while working on a film together. Arthur, Jack, and Tui would keep Clara company while Earl was working at the hospital. While Tui's official address was at Hollywood's Warren Kelton Hotel, she spent most of her time at Clara's Malibu cottage. Whenever Tui would leave and go to her hotel room, Clara would call her and say, "I'm lonely, I can't sleep. Come over." And she always did. Robert Bow then started to flirt with Tui. Ew, what a fucking creep. "I think Daddy's in love with you. How's about you being my mother?" "Not on your goddamn life. You're older than I am. And besides, I don't believe in marriage," Tui responded. Perfect reply. Perfect. Like, kill that as quick as possible. But also shows how desperate that Clara was to have a motherly figure in her life, even if it was a friend who was younger than her. Yeah, that's just really heartbreaking. But there's a more urgent matter that would greatly complicate things. Tui noticed that Clara was signing blank checks for her household expenses, and Tui grew suspicious of Clara's staff misusing the funds. Tui then compared one of the grocery bills to a check, and then she went to Clara with the evidence. Clara was livid and fired 2 of her staff members on the spot. They blamed Tui, vowing to get their revenge. About a week later, the phone at Tui's hotel room rang. She picked up, assuming that it was Clara, but the front desk had called to let her know that 2 police officers were on their way up. When they arrived, they told her that they were U.S. Immigration Department officers. Tui, who is from New Zealand, entered the United States without a passport or a visa. This led her to face immediate deportation. The officers advised her to call a lawyer. Tui panicked and attempted to call Clara, but Robert Bow answered instead. She told him everything, and he assured Tui that it would be handled. She felt relieved, and upon hanging up, the officers asked who she had called. "Robert Bow, my fiancé." She couldn't believe the words that just came out of her mouth. Clara needed a mother, and I needed a father. But she also needed a husband in order to stay in the United States. She had built her life in LA and was terrified at the idea of having to leave it all behind. Her love for her life outweighed the disgust at the idea of marrying Robert. They would get married on September 22nd, 1928. On the marriage certificate, Robert would list his job as retired businessman at the age of 45. He was in fact 53 years old. Tui was just about to turn 22. The news of the marriage baffled everyone in her life. It came as a complete surprise to the members of the film colony. The press reported, assuming the facts at face value, but there was much more than what was at face value. What Paramount knew and what the press couldn't print was that while Robert was pretty crazy about Tui, Tui was pretty crazy about Clara. Oh, everything started to make a little bit more sense now. And they were just roommates, but actually. It was whispered through the community that Tui was on the lavender side. And again, while it was rumored that Clara herself was bisexual, they still seemed just to be rumors. Clara wanted Tui and her to be real buddies, just like the 2 guys in Wings. When an actor asked Tui about her lovely friendship with Clara with a knowing, wicked grin, Tui blushed, saying, "Clara adores men only. Heterosexual to the core, you know?" Robert and Tui would live at her hotel room, but spent most of their time at Clara's house. We became sort of a family group, the 3 of us. But it was a strange dynamic, to put it lightly, with the 53-year-old father shockingly jealous of Clara, Tui secretly yearning for her stepdaughter, and Clara naively delighting that her father and best friend had fallen in love. To Tui's relief, the marriage would not last long. She and a few of her friends would catch Robert having an affair. She saw the opportunity to play the wronged wife and demanded a divorce. She was granted one due to the mental cruelty of Robert. Tui had hoped to stay close to Clara through all of this, but Clara hated that the marriage had ended. Tui arrived unannounced with Jen to confront Clara. "I don't see why we still can't be buddies and see each other. We're through, and don't think you're gonna get any more money from Daddy. He ain't got any." This was too much for Tui to handle. She stormed off hurt and drunk back to her hotel. On her way out, she saw a giant photo ad of Clara winking at her. She defaced it. She never saw Clara again. Clara would then have her worst performing film yet. The formula seemed to be weakening. At the same time, Elizabeth Pearson came to LA in hopes to reconcile with Earl. He would pick her up with Clara's new Cadillac. Wondering how an intern at a hospital could afford a luxury car, Earl assured her that he had borrowed it from a friend. She was suspicious, and from reading local gossip, found that it was Clara's. The local gossip would read, "He is married. He has not been living with his wife. There are no children. I love him. As to my getting married, if it were possible now, I'd do it." Elizabeth then confronted Earl that she knew it was Clara. He then confessed in hopes that it would expedite the divorce process. While it did, not in the ways that he or Clara had hoped. Elizabeth told Earl that Clara would be cited in the lawsuit, seeking $150,000 in damages from her, which would be about $2,700,000 in today's money. Clara was stunned. Paramount then got involved, begging everyone to keep it out of the press, worrying that it would wreck Clara's career after her weak film. Earl then immediately returned to Dallas. On October 17, 1928, Elizabeth officially filed for divorce. And to the relief of everyone else, Clara was not mentioned. Elizabeth would then move to Germany with her husband in hopes to patch up their marriage. Yet Earl would continue to secretly send Clara telegrams, keeping the affair alive. With the future of Clara's career being uncertain, her wanting to work in dramas, the formula starting to crumble, and her wanting to leave Hollywood altogether, a new type of film emerged. Clara would start to work on talkies. In 1928, the vast majority of films were silent. By 1930, almost every single film was a talkie. The generation of silent films was over, and Clara was terrified. With not being used to having to memorize so many lines, along with her stammer, she wasn't sure if she could evolve with the new demands of her career. Listening to playback of test recordings was worse than she had feared. She would burst into tears while saying, "How can I be in a picture with a voice like that?" It was a big change for all actors, and they hired private coaches to help them along through the transition. But Paramount didn't hire anyone to help Clara, so she was left to fend for herself. Her voice was low, with a thick Brooklyn accent when she was relaxed. But her stutter would reappear when she got nervous on set. She would start to snowball, with her voice getting higher and then getting stuck on a word over and over and over again. "We were at fault. We should have taken 6 months to train her," said Paramount, but they only gave her 2 weeks to perfect a new skill all on her own. Despite her reaction, her first talking film, The Wild Party, went into production on January 2nd, 1929. On set, you could sense her fear. She knew she was expected to have perfected this new talent without any theatrical training. Louise Brooks would meet Clara during this time. She saw how stunned and helpless Clara was, from the gossip mocking her voice and accent. "They made me feel so terrible that I can't talk." Louise couldn't believe how Clara, being Hollywood's top star, had such a low self-esteem. She got 30,000 fan letters a month, but she already knew that she was finished. Her confidence was crushing while her popularity soared. A national survey of theater owners ranked Clara as the top female star, getting almost twice as many votes as anyone else. She was certain that she couldn't evolve with this new technology. She contractually still had to make films with Paramount and didn't have enough money to retire yet. She was beyond certain that both her career and her life were doomed. And that's the end of part 2. Part 3 will come out in a few weeks. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and ding that bell icon if you want to get notified when part 3 comes out. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.